welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
And this episode, Darin, is special because it's our 50th episode.
50. You know, a lot of people, they've got like 100 or 200 or 300, and we're at 50, but that's kind of a milestone for all the breaks.
We're getting there. But we also have a guest today. My brother-in-law, Luke R. Harris, is going to join us. And he chose the movie Back to the Future, which is from 1985, directed by Robert Zemeckis, starring Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. But we'll get into that soon. So before that, let's talk about what we did last episode, which was How the Grinch Stole Christmas. So what do you think about that one?
But both versions, right? There's three versions? There's the 1966, the 2000, and whenever the Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yes, we watched the first two, right?
Right. Just before we talk about that, somebody was talking to me about the Cumberbatch version. Does he talk in a high American accent in the movie?
I recall it being kind of a lower register voice, if I remember right.
Okay.
I don't think it had that British accent to it, though.
Interesting. I don't know. But I would assume that he's got a very bassy voice. Like he could probably compete with Boris Karloff, but from the sounds of it, he doesn't really do that from what I understand. So I don't know. I just don't. Like we talked about with the two movies, it's hard to adapt Dr. Seuss unless you do a straightforward, like as short as possible, just add a few songs kind of version, which is why the 1966, I think, stands the test of time. Yeah. The Chuck Jones animation, even though it repeats some of the cells, it's emblematic of the time it was made. And it's the animation and the character that's in the animation. Obviously, I just mentioned Chuck Jones. That personality comes across, and I think that's what kind of makes it modern even today. But when you try to pad it out and change the point of what the book is, I think that's where the Jim Carrey Grinch went totally horribly wrong, and why I just didn't agree with any of it. What did you think of both of those?
Well, yeah, I still thought the cartoon should be remembered, and I think that the Ron Howard version should be remade. But like you said, it probably shouldn't have been made in the first place. Like you said, you wouldn't make it.
Yeah.
But also, I think they just did a horrible job with the backstory of the Grinch character, and just was unnecessary and just didn't add to the story at all, and took away from the story actually. And it was over the top. It was overdone. But yeah, so we're worth a remake.
We're absolutely worth a remake, or worth not ever remaking. Just keep the 1966 version as is, and just leave Dr. Seuss the hell alone.
Yeah.
So, with Back to the Future, I know that, I kind of push back against it because that's, we talked earlier about how we didn't. I know Ken Brown wanted to do Star Wars. We flat out told him no. But we want to try to branch out and do different things, and these movies are still nostalgic for us. And I think with our 50th episode, it's maybe worth a shot. And if it works and people like it, we'll maybe try to do the other things with it. Would you say that maybe the only movie popular wise that competes with Back to the Future is It's a Wonderful Life? I know we did that one a few years back.
Yeah, I mean, that was one we maybe should have left alone, but it was such a big part of my childhood, I had to go back and revisit it.
Right. And then we did Batman and A Few Good Men, which I think are a little higher up. So we're kind of breaking the rule, but again, there's no point totally ignoring some of these movies. So I'm excited to chat with Luke about Back to the Future.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. But before we do it, let's go ahead and watch the trailer.
I had a horrible nightmare. Dreamed that I went back in time.
Well, safe and sound now, back in good old 1955.
1955? Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Hey, Mcfly!
This is a big one, the one I've been waiting for all my life.
You're my blood.
Wait, 21 gigawatts!
Marty, we're sending you back to the future.
Okay, so Back to the Future, 1985, directed by Robert Zemeckis, starring Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, and Thomas F. Wilson. They're all in there. Luke, thanks for coming on. By the way, we brought you on because you're a fan of the podcast and you're my brother-in-law. Because I think you're a fan. You're a fan, right?
I'm a fan of the movie, at least. It's my desert island fantasy. Or I guess the question is, what one movie would you bring with you? Glazing over how you're going to watch the movie, but if you can bring one movie with you, what is it? And Back to the Future is usually my go-to if I want to watch a movie. There's a lot of reasons for that. I don't know what you want to get into, but
first of all,
one I chose.
You have a podcast yourself. You host the podcast Q for You, correct?
Yeah. So it stands for Question for You. But we got involved in a lot of political stuff because people thought that my partner was Q and I was anonymous somehow. And we got, yeah, for real. They were calling him Q for months. And I'm like, guys, his name is RJ. It's not Q.
R is the next letter in the alphabet.
And then my Twitter is, Who Cares Safety, because Luke Harris, if you say it too fast, sounds like Who Cares, and that gets me in a lot of trouble with cops. But, so they thought I was anonymous, and we're like, no, never mind, whatever. So we've been trying to steer away from political, and on Wednesdays we do a Wednesday rewind, where during the week him and I will watch a movie and do a review. So I'm kind of up with the movie reviews, but I know Johnny is huge movie buff, and I'm looking forward to this whole experience.
Oh, cool. Also, I know that you had some experience in film. Your dad, my father-in-law, he worked in the construction side of things, built a lot of sets for a lot of different films over the years, and you worked on some of those movies with him. What are some of the ones you worked on?
So he's done Rocketeer, Grand Canyon, a couple others like that. And then by the time I got involved, it was almost this rite of passage thing with the brothers. I worked on just one movie, was Go by Doug Lyman.
Oh.
And it was kind of in that same style of disjointed storytelling from multiple perspectives, like Pulp Fiction. And we were brought in. It was basically just my dad, myself, and one brother, my brother Caleb, and we built everything before the company got signed on with the union, and then they brought in a bunch of other day laborers. But we were shooting it right next to the soundstage that was shooting Blade with Wesley Snipes. So we got to see him every once in a while in full costume. That was not at all freaky. But,
did he say any words to you, or is it mostly just grunts?
No, he was in character. Glasses, the sword. They let him walk around with the sword.
Of course.
He was just armed to and our sound stage was the closest path to his stage, I guess, from the parking lot. And there was no security. They weren't going to stop him anyways. But,
surreal. Yeah.
Wesley Snipes, yeah. But the fun part about Go was, you built this room, you built that building, you made this prop piece, and you knew what it was for. It was going to be a part of a strip club or part of a back room, and someone was going to have to punch through something. And you knew you made it all out of wood, but by the time everyone was done with it, it looked like concrete, it looked like plaster, it looked like wood, but it was, or metal even, but it was just fake. We made all that. And it was just kind of it helped with the magic and appreciation of movies.
Yeah, that's cool.
Did you get to meet any of the casts, like Sarah Polley and William Fichtner?
So yeah, at the time, Katie Holmes was super popular. She just got off of Dawson's Creek, and then Scott Wolf was just off of Party of Five.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why they were pulled in there. But there was a rap party afterwards, and I'm the same age as Katie Holmes. I would have. It was at a bowling alley. I would have met her. We would have fallen in love instantly because I'm just charming. But my jackass of a brother Caleb, he'd never dated a girl in his life and was too scared to even leave the house. So we spent the whole night just waiting for him to pick out a shirt, and we didn't end up going.
Oh,
So there, I missed my chance.
life ruined.
Luke Harris Holmes. That's a nice reference.
I would have gone with that. It would have worked.
Whatever. Yeah.
Well, cool. Thanks for joining us tonight, Luke. You picked Back to the Future, and Darin and I, when we first started this podcast, we kind of had an unwritten rule, like we're not going to do movies like Star Wars. We're not going to do movies like Back to the Future because these are movies that everyone knows, everyone's seen them. There's not really much more we can add to the conversation that hasn't already been said. But I think we have some good topics tonight that we're going to talk about that might maybe shine some light on something different, aspects of the film itself. But tell us quick, why did you pick Back to the Future, and what was your experience like when you first saw it?
There's two big reasons why it's one of my favorite. As you can see, I like movies as well, and a part of what got me involved in movies was movie posters and art. And this is one of the few movie posters that my hero, Drew Struzan, got to actually art direct. He got to actually bring Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd and the car to his house in Pasadena, and he got to photograph the pictures he needed for his reference for doing the posters. And he's been able to sit in the original car and got to meet with them. And it was one of the few times where he's actually got to interact with the actors. All the other times he's just had reference photos. And so when Michael J. Fox got to meet him, he's like, "Hey, wait, you're the guy. You're the movie poster guy." And so it was a treat for them as well. And so he's one of my favorite artists that I studied from, and I got to meet him when I was doing my senior exit show for college, and did a portrait for him and was able to get that to him. And at the time on his easel, he had the Walking Dead season 1 promo piece.
Wow.
And neither one of us knew what we both didn't know it was a comic book. We had no idea where it was going to go from there. And I have a fear of zombies, but I have a huge passion for time travel stories. I love time travel. And it seems to always be a recurring theme that I always like to get back to it in my stories. And so Back to the Future has just always been one of those just amazing things that get you to believe in modern magic, because science it's a practical application of taking a theory, a concept, and making it into reality, which is basically magic. And that's what the 80s was all about, was everything was dimensional portals or something. It was like the Ninja Turtle cartoons, He-Man, Beastmaster 2, they all had dimensional portals. And even as they're telling the story, Marty McFly's just surprised that Doc would make a time machine out of a very rare car.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean? The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
A DeLorean. There's only like 1,000 of them in production or something, but now it's coming back.
Yeah. So tell us real quick, what was your first experience like? Did you see this movie in a theater? Did you watch it at home for the first time? What happened? How did you experience it the very first time?
We saw all 3 of them in the theater. All 8 kids with my mom and dad. My mom and dad are big movie goers, and we always went to movies. There was a dollar theater, second run theater down from us, and that was just the family treat. A couple of my brothers and sisters, we ended up working at movie theaters, so going to movies was always a big deal with our family. I mean, Christmas, Thanksgiving, at least a couple times a year. Maybe not every month, but a couple times a year. And we always watched that, got to see a movie in the theater, and I remember seeing all 3 of them on the big screen.
Okay, Cool.
So,
Well, real quick, I'll go over my history with it. I saw this movie for the first time at a drive-in, and that was the Tip Drive-In in Orem, Utah. And back then, when this movie came out, it was so big and it was so popular that it kind of became a competition with me and my friends to see who could see it the most. And so I would go back and see it again and again just to one up my friends and be like, no, I've seen it 3 times. Well, I've seen it 4 times. I mean, so I saw it multiple times over and over again, and I loved it. I really loved this experience when I first saw it. And back then, I wasn't really into film. I was just a moviegoer like you, and I didn't really notice all the things as far as the issues the movie has. But I mean, it's still a fun movie, and I still really enjoy it. And real quick, I've always had this kind of rule within my own, how a movie makes my favorite movie list. And if it's a movie that is, well done as far as the acting, directing, the writing, everything is put together nicely. But also it has to be something that I can watch over and over again and not get tired of. And when you mentioned Back to the Future, I kind of thought, well, I don't need to watch that one because I've seen it a billion times, I don't need to watch it again. But then I thought, well, why not? I love this movie. Let's watch it again. So I watched it again. And again, I had a great experience watching it. And so it's one that I never tire of this movie. And so thanks for bringing it to us because I had a fun time watching it again.
I actually got to see it during pandemic when they were trying to, revitalize getting people back in the theater.
Yeah.
A friend of ours rented out the whole theater, which is super cheap now. And it was in our church group, and like kind of all of the parents and everybody are all about the same age. So we all grew up watching this as kids or whatever. And I'm sitting next to my bishop, and every time there was a cuss word, I'm like, hey, Bishop, they said a bad word. And it was just as fun watching it and getting to mess with people. But, it's always nice to get to see something on the big screen. I've seen, Wizard of Oz on the big screen and as many films that I can come across. I mean, I got to enjoy some classic stuff out in Hollywood when I lived out there. I had a buddy that always would go to these random little theaters, and if you can see something on the big screen, then take advantage of that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Darin, what was your first experience with this movie?
Well, it's one of those things where Back to the Future has just been a part of my life since as long as I can remember. Like, as long as I remember movies, Back to the Future has always been a staple. I know I've talked about experiences of like Ghostbusters and having my mom yell at me because I get scared, that kind of thing. And I don't have those memories with this one, maybe because I was just in awe of it the whole time. I just know that it's, when you're watching these movies, it's important a lot of time too, I think, to watch them when they first come out, like these big cultural impact movies. You want to see them when they first hit, as opposed to like years down the line when it's like, what's the big deal? Because you don't quite get into them the same way. And, one of the reasons that Jonny and I decided to pick this movie after all the misgivings we had about other people trying to get Star Wars on, things like that, is like the way that people look at movies now is completely different. So, the way people look at Back to the Future, they don't understand what the big deal was. They don't understand the appeal. There's some points that we'll talk about that they like to latch onto. And then kind of use that as a way to say, I'm never watching that movie, even though it's a complete misunderstanding of it. But then it's also one of those movies where there are perceived flaws in the movie that people like to nitpick. And it's like one of those things where it's like, well, calm down. Like, we can explain it. Let's not be like the everything wrong with, is that what it is? The
Cinema Sins?
Cinema Sins, those guys. I'm glad I forgot their name. But it's one of those things where that's the culture we live in, where the nitpicks become the criticism, which is not the same thing. It's like, guys, if you just relax a little bit, it explains everything in the movie for you. You don't have to like latch on. And that's what people are doing. Back to the Future is one of those that I see a lot of that on, especially on Twitter. So that's a big reason why I did decide, one of many reasons that, hey, let's talk about that one and let's actually tackle some of those issues. But again, Back to the Future is a movie, and I've mentioned it before, that's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I've studied it. I know it by heart. Just like Jonny said, I didn't have to watch this because I know the dialogue. I've memorized it. But I just decided to put it on just to watch bits and pieces, and I ended up watching the whole thing. It's just one of those movies that's, let me watch this part. I like this part. Oh, I like this part too. I'll watch this. And then before you know it, it's credits. You're like, that was a damn good movie, you know, like it stands up and it works. And it's kind of a spoiler because of what we do at the end of the episode, but you know, we do want to talk about why maybe it's such a lasting seminal movie for us.
Yeah. Well, I think we all know the backstory of the movie, how it got made. Bob Gale went back home to visit his parents, and he was looking through his parents' yearbook, and he saw his dad back then and thought, what would it be like to meet my parents, you know, when they were in high school? That's kind of where the idea started. And then Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis kind of like worked together to get this thing made. And Steven Spielberg, of course, you know, got on board with it and helped produce it. And then I want to talk more about the actors because I'm an actor. I like to talk about the actors. So let's talk about Michael J. Fox because he makes the movie. I mean, we all know they got Eric Stoltz in the beginning and they hired him because of what he did in Mask and other things that he's done. He's a good actor. I always liked Eric Stoltz too. But seeing the footage that I have of Eric Stoltz in the Marty McFly role, it just isn't. It isn't there. He was playing it way too serious. It just did not come through like what they wanted. And finally, they got Michael J. Fox in. He shot Back to the Future at night while they did Family Ties during the day. And Michael J. Fox just brought Marty McFly to a whole new level. And I think that's what makes the movie so great, really, is Michael J. Fox. I mean, that's just my opinion, but I think he's a good enough actor that he has that gravitas and he brings that to the role. But what do you guys think of Michael J. Fox and his portrayal of Marty McFly? Luke, you can go first.
And I heard that he barely was able to get that part and that they had already had someone cast. But I think he brought a lot of actual awkward teenism to it. The not so much slapsticky, but they used a lot of slapsticky type humor, tripping over himself, almost a commentary to making fun of the style of clothes, but just that he made it, you felt as nervous as he did. And you felt, I mean, you really did feel like you were in his shoes going through these awkward situations of meeting his parents and trying to get away from his creepy mom that was trying to kiss him and stuff. Just all these things, the cracking in his voice and how, you know, he brought that. And I agree with you. You know, nobody else would have been able to bring that.
Yeah, I have one of my notes here that he's got some little cartoonisms that he does, like little exaggerated motions when he's wearing the hazmat suit or whatever, and Doc loads the plutonium and it like scares him. But especially when he goes back to the past, when he's trying to deal with things, you know, I was laughing really hard today when he was dealing with like in the diner with George. And just his exaggerated emotions of how he just couldn't believe the situation. I was laughing at those, or the way he's like staring at him, where you see his face come into frame just over like Crispin Glover's face. But like a lot of those cartoonisms, they make sense because of the situation that he's in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When we talk about Eric Stoltz, it's weird because I guess on set, Eric Stoltz was a method actor and he made everybody call him Marty. And the scenes with he and Thomas Wilson, it's weird because as much of a jerk and a creep as Biff is, Thomas F. Wilson is a really nice guy in real life. And that's what we hear a lot about. The scene when they're in the cafeteria and they're almost fighting, they had to do take after take. And Eric Stoltz kept pushing him so hard that it was like bruising his shoulder blades. And Thomas F. Wilson was like, you got to stop this, man. You don't need to be so rough. And it got to the point where it was like, I'm going to get back at him. Like it made him so mad that during the scene where he pulls Marty out of the car when he's with the Lorraine scene, he was going to actually sock him in the stomach for real. But of course, Stoltz got fired by then. But it's just like you said, they weren't making it work. I don't think Stoltz was good with everybody, not like Michael J. Fox was. Like you can see like Michael J. Fox kind of feeding off people and vice versa. And, you know, the scene where he puts back on his pants in Lorraine's room and he falls over, you know, Zemeckis wanted Stoltz to do that. And Stoltz is like, why would I do that? That's so dumb. Like, that's not what my character is. But it adds a laugh and it's funny and it adds these little comedic moments that, again, he goes back to the past. It's like, how do you deal with that? And Michael J. Fox has these little moments where you believe that he would be exasperated. It's part of his character. But again, what I love about the Marty McFly character is he's a stud. Like, he can step up to the plate. He's not going to stand for people being picked on. You see him stand up for George. You see him stand up for Lorraine without even thinking. It's instinctive. And the part where he beats Biff and his cronies on the skateboard and the manure, that's the hero we want to be. We want to be cool like that, right? So Marty's just a fun, great character. I don't know if Stoltz would have been able to pull it off as much as Fox does. You watch Fox in the role and you're like, there's no way anybody else could have played this part. And it just made him a star.
Totally agree. I know that they also changed up the wardrobe that Michael J. Fox wore, because Eric Stoltz wore like all black and it was kind of melancholy and moody. And then when they hired Michael J. Fox, they said, let's brighten him up and put him in that, that jacket and the red life preserver vest thing. And just kind of like lighten the mood. And also I think it helped having the crew and the cast already work through the whole, like 2/3 of the movie already. They already knew what they were doing. They were already like practiced and rehearsed. And so it probably added to the performances of the other actors, having already been there, done that, and then to do it again with Marty. And then, of course, him bringing a different, what do you call it? Nuances to the character, I guess you would say.
And
like
energy.
Like a freshness. Because you're saying, they already got to do the scene, but now they're seeing it through his eyes and getting to feed off of his energy. So that could make it, rather interesting and fun for them. And so, I can see how that works.
And it ties in with what Zemeckis and Gale wanted. Like, that's why they kicked Stoltz off. Just he wasn't matching the vision that they had. And just, can you guys imagine what the movie would be like with the moody, dark Marty McFly?
I would like to see it, actually, just for fun.
Just to see how it works, right? I guarantee you we would not be talking about it the way we talk about it today, but it would have been interesting at least to see what that would have been like.
All right, well, let's
would
talk
have been
about
a one and done.
Let's talk about Crispin Glover, because again, he's another character or actor in this movie that I think just brings the George McFly character to a whole new level too. And he's a character in real life as it is. We all know he's kind of odd and kind of quirky, but he's done some amazing work throughout his film career as well. But his George McFly character is iconic. So I think he does a great job in this role. What do you think, Luke?
He is, Crispin Glover is secretly somebody I desperately hope that someday I'm allowed to work with if I ever get to make any movie.
Just don't use his versatility anywhere else, and then he won't sue you.
Yeah.
Right. But the versatility he had just in this, just as George McFly, and then later, you catch him randomly in the Charlie's Angels horrible movie as just this amazing villain that I'm like, I'm never going to mess with that guy ever. And he does a great creep.
Yeah.
A little bit of his own, personal Crispin Glover in there. But just the versatility, just how he wanted to just ignore what Marty was trying to tell him and go back to his regular life and keep to himself. We talked about kind of Michael J. Fox's ability to, exaggerate and pantomime some of these overexpress some expressionisms in his acting so that you felt that emotion. Crispin Glover was doing his own world. I'm going to go back to, he's moving his hair out of his face. He was sweaty. You could feel how weird and awkward this kid was too. And he's just like, he was so into being that person. And then, I love when he's 1980s dad. And it's and how it reflected Lorraine's dad and the type of grandpas we all had that would just watching TV and laugh. We all know that guy. and then how he changed over the course of the film. And it's amazing how that aspect of the story, that part of the whole story is important to me. I mean, I don't really see that his mom grew a whole lot, but you saw that Marty's whole mission was to help his dad. become, to stand up to his bullies, because that's what Marty was always about. He knew he was a runt. He knew he was the underdog, but he didn't want anybody to be pushed over. And that was his whole goal, was to get his dad to come out of his shell. And you really get that in the movie. You really feel their relationship. And that's what I liked about Crispin Glover, is he was able to play 3 different versions of himself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right, what do you think?
That's definitely what I wanted to mention, the 3 different performances. And they're all nuanced performances. It's not like 3 different again, I'm going to keep using this, cartoon versions of it. I think if you look at it, you've got obviously Michael J. Fox, who's a star. You've got Christopher Lloyd, who's a great foil, and he's very Christopher Lloyd-ish. But Crispin Glover is the unsung hero, I think, of this movie, because you don't notice. It's so subtle. Like, he plays the nerdy dad, but then he also plays like he's not quite as nerdy, and he's still got some confidence, or at least because he wants to be a writer, right? Because he has that confidence there. But the 80s dad, like you said, Luke, he has no confidence. And so he's the guy that, like, he's not going to go anywhere. He's stuck in a dead end job. You have the 50s George Mcfly. And then you have, it's amazing. It's like he grows by like 3 feet, like at the end. Like when he's, author dad, George Mcfly at the end, he's a stud. He stands up straight. He looks 10 feet tall. And I have a note in here saying that amazing what a little confidence, how attractive it makes you. Because as soon as he sees Lorraine get hurt and he punches out Biff, you can see there's a change in him that starts. And I don't know. I just think just like you said, his performance is fantastic. And if I'm going to tie it in, like the personal stuff, when Marty not confronts him, but it's talking to him in the cafeteria, you know how George is writing in his notebook and he's transferring notes over to another notebook and he's writing stories. Today I watched it and I remembered again, like that was me in junior high school. I remember having notebooks in my backpack and in class, just counting down the minutes until I could get to lunch period so I could write my stories. And I would do that. I would transfer notes in this little notebook into a bigger notebook. And just watching that, it was like, I'm George. Like, it's weird. Like, you want to be Marty, but I'm George. But I also thought, did I do that before the movie? Because I would have been, in 85, I would have been like 8. So I must have learned that from this movie and done it myself, because junior high school, 14, 15, that kind of thing. So I must have learned that from this movie. I just thought that it was a weird kind of, wow, that's me, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's funny, because you actually played a George type character in the very first play we were ever in together. You played.
That's right.
Kind of George like that. Anyway,
my performance was nowhere near as nuanced, but yeah.
It was still good though. So yeah, Christopher Lloyd. Let's talk about him real quick. Not too much, because honestly, I think he was great. We all probably think he was great, but I couldn't see Christopher Lloyd as anybody else but Doc after seeing Back to the Future. And anything else he was in, it was, oh, there's Doc. It was always just, that's Doc Brown. Not that he wasn't good in those other movies he's done, but I think he's just Doc. That's just how I think of Christopher Lloyd.
Well, yeah, even before, when he was doing Taxi, now we can kind of compare him to Kramer, type of that same. You could see where where the character of Kramer was evolved, kind of that same thing. But basically, Christopher Lloyd was the same person, just without the weird hair in Taxi.
Yeah.
But I can argue that him as Fester was slightly different.
Okay.
But still, you could see the eyes, and you're like, why does Christopher Lloyd have no hair?
Yeah, I think I like the Peabody and Sherman kind of thing. It's like that kind of relationship that they had with and the time traveling, obviously. But because I'm going to keep bringing this up, and another thing that and we'll talk about it more when we talk about the plot of the movie, but John Mulaney got a very famous skit where he talks about Back to the Future and like what the pitch meeting must have been. And the first thing that he hits on that bugs me is how he talks about, why is Marty, this teenager, friends with this old scientist dude? Like, they never talk about it. Like, it's weird. Like, they never mention like what happened, like for them to meet. It's just there. And it's like, how would they possibly meet? It makes no sense. And when someone like John Mulaney says that to a millennial who's never seen Back to the Future, they're going to side with John Mulaney without even seeing the movie. They're going to form an opinion of it. But I wrote here, it's not just the Peabody and Sherman kind of connection. Marty needs a father figure in his life when this movie starts. Do you guys realize that? Do people out there realize that? He needs a father figure. He doesn't have it with his dad. Like, he's tougher than his dad. He's disappointed in his dad. He's got Biff that hangs around. He's not a father figure. So the fact that it doesn't matter how they met, that just, it angers me. It's like, that stuff doesn't matter. Why do you need to know how they met? Marty's kind of an outcast trying to find his way. He's an awkward teenager. He finds Doc. They befriend each other. He sees in Doc a father figure, someone that believes in him and feeds his imagination, with the guitar and stuff like that. That's a good, solid connection to begin with. That's, again, what the movie's about. And why don't people sit back and think instead of just going off of what someone like John Mulaney says about a movie? Don't take something at face value. Let's do some thinking for ourselves. And Christopher Lloyd, they have these moments of sincere love and appreciation for each other. There are moments where it's not just a joke relationship. These two care for each other. When Doc is saying, it's going to be hard waiting 30 years to talk to you. Or when Marty gives him the hug before, and Doc he's like weirded out that Marty's giving him an extra long hug. And there's just these moments that are so sincere, and it makes you believe in these characters. And it's because of that chemistry that Mcfly, that Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd have. And, like you were saying, Johnny, Christopher Lloyd, that this is his signature role. And it's hard to see people after that. It's like Christopher Reeve, like once he's Superman for the rest of your life. So yeah. I can definitely understand that. But again, great performance. Great.
I agree. They do definitely have a chemistry. And I think that's really apparent on screen. But when I was younger, I didn't question where they came from, how they met. I didn't even think about it. It was like, oh, they're just friends. They just, he's a scientist and he's a high school student and want to be a rock star. It didn't mean anything. I didn't think about it. But however, this time I did kind of go, how did they meet? I wonder how they actually met. But it really wouldn't matter to the story though, if we did know or didn't know. So I agree with you.
Well,
that's not the point.
Even with the story, we saw with the story, he's supposed to check on the dog. He's, neighbors or they know each other. And Doc's asked him to check on Einstein. And while he's there, he's going to play with his sound equipment and sound experiments. And just like was touched on before, the Peabody Sherman, the master and apprentice, the mentoring type of attitude of finding a hero and mentoring and studying with them, having no family relations or any connections at all, that has gone away in our society. It doesn't exist. And that's why, it sounds like a crazy elevator pitch for John Mulaney to say that. I've heard that sketch. It's hilarious as an elevator pitch for a movie.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't sell that nowadays.
Yeah.
Right.
It was a different time.
Yeah, it's a funny sketch. And that's not, but it's just weird that people make that their gospel.
Their reason for not watching the movie. Right?
Yeah. And don't you guys think it's really neat too, that Marty's in need of a father figure? When Doc goes away at the end, when he goes away, George is now the father figure. He doesn't need Doc in his life, really. It's I don't know. I just like that as an arc. It's very well thought out screenplay, I think. And the performances pull it off.
The thing that Marty's lacking, not necessarily his father was there. What he was lacking was someone to show him how to fulfill his dreams. And Doc was every day fulfilling a dream.
Yeah.
I have a hypothesis. I have a concept. I want to do this. I'm going to do it and blow a hole through the side of my house and keep trying until, lie to the Libyans and get some plutonium. And I'm going to make a car go through the future. That was what he was seeing. He wanted to be a rock star. He wanted to try out. He wanted to succeed. And Doc was someone that was blindly just doing crazy things and hoping to hit the mark. But his dad was just not even trying.
Yeah.
And that's what happens a lot of times. People just stop trying to live their dreams.
Luke, that's a great point. I never even thought of that. That's another great connection, even further than anything I'd thought of before. So thank you for that.
All right, lastly, let's talk about Thomas F. Wilson, Biff. And this is the one I mentioned that I think might not be as on the same level as everybody else, only because when I saw it when I was younger, I always could tell he was acting. For some reason, I was like, oh, that guy's acting. The other ones, they seemed a lot more natural in front of a camera. Maybe they had more experience. But for some reason, Biff in my eyes was like, he's too cartoony for me. But I love Thomas F. Wilson. I think he's great. And I think he is the Biff character, but still the Biff character is over the top. Like it's almost just too much. I never knew a bully who was that over the top like that, but I didn't grow up in the 50s. But anyway, still, I think his performance was good, but I don't think he was good as everybody else. What do you guys think?
I've seen him in some other stuff, and you know, your brain instantly recognizes the face. You go, oh, hey, it's Biff. But you know, I still gave him the benefit of the doubt, watched what he was doing in his later things, and you know, and I was glad to see him not playing Biff anymore and getting to play some other stuff. He was on DC's Legends of Tomorrow. It's one of those times like family likes to binge watch a bunch of stuff. I don't have time for that anymore now that I have to write books. But anyways, it was nice to see him not having to play that character, and it makes you wonder, you know, did they want him to be over the top, or was that something that he brought to the table? That's my question.
Well, if I was to kind of hypothesize on that, number one, like maybe he comes off as because he's probably the most two-dimensional character maybe out of everybody. There's not a lot to him. There's not a lot of change. He's just the bully. He's a cartoon, like you said from the beginning. Again, the problem I have with Back to the Future 2 is that everybody's a full-on sitcom cartoon version of each other, of themselves, and that's what I don't like. It's like these aren't the same characters to me. It's like a Bugs Bunny version of Back to the Future, but he's cartoonish, but he's cartoonish in a way that I buy, that, like you said, he's the bully. And I think on DC's Legends of Tomorrow, since they all do that stuff, I think he has like a line where he actually gets the make like a tree and leave, and he gets it right on that show as an in-joke. And we're talking about a little bit of the sequels too. I think Wilson hits his stride in Back to the Future 3 because a lot of the comedy parts are so well played and they're so subtle. The way that he's counting outside and he forgets where he is, so he has to look over his cronies and they have to show him like the number, and he says 7. Yeah. It's all that, it goes all through that movie, and it's just very nuanced. It's like he saved his best performance for last. I don't know how to explain that.
I was going to mention that I think Back to the Future 3 was his best performance as Griff.
Right. But the thing with Biff, though, is that he's a cartoon, right? But in the scene at the end where he pulls Marty out of the car and he looks down and he sees Lorraine's dress, as soon as he climbs into that car, he becomes irredeemable for me. The character becomes irredeemable. He's not much of a cartoon. He is what he is. He's a full-on rapist. If George hadn't have shown up, Lorraine, that would have been trouble. And you can see, and I do want to talk about Leah Thompson for a little bit too, but you can see in her face that she is terrified in that car when she's begging George for help. Yeah. So once he climbs in that car, that's where it becomes, there's no hope for this guy. I can't laugh at this guy anymore. He is a complete and total creep, and he's not worth my time. And I don't know, I bought that the most because I buy him as a sudden threat instead of a cartoon.
Yeah, and it is very satisfying when he does get laid out by...
Yeah, and isn't it great, I forgot to mention this too, that George takes up the mantle of Marty at the end. He's the one, you see, Marty beat Biff all the time with the manure and, and stuff like, and in the cafeteria, and it's George that takes the mantle, and he's the one that finally punches, because you see Marty punch Biff in the diner, right? It doesn't knock him out. George is the guy that knocks him out, and he kind of takes up that mantle, and I think that's great. But Leah Thompson, what did we think about her? If we wanted to talk about her, just the last cast member,
I thought she was great.
she's not as, and Luke, I'll ask your opinion, but she's not as nuanced. She doesn't have as much to play with as Crispin Glover does. But it is funny how she's like, I never parked a car with a boy. I never called a boy. And then she flat out does all that stuff because that's what you're trying to teach your kids, morals. And again, a lot of the comedy stuff, especially with Marty in that car where, she says, it's not like I've never parked, or, I drink all the time, stuff like that. And he's reacting cartoonishly. And, she says, you're starting to sound like my mother. And he shoots her that look. But again, like she's great. She's just what she needs to be. And then at the end, again, it's like she's grown a little bit. The makeup too she's not as wrinkled. She's not as damaged by alcohol, and all the abuse that she's gone through. I don't know, Luke, what did you think about her?
Yeah, because her at the beginning in the 80s was definitely kind of, yearning for the good old days. You could tell she was thinking about things that she didn't share with people, just secret parts of her life. She had a dark and depressing, shallow marriage, just hollow marriage, that she had weird fond memories that George wasn't sharing with her. He was in the here and now and the gratification now, but she was definitely one of those people that was living in the past, and those were her heydays. And then to get to see how wild and crazy she was as a kid, and absolutely everything she was saying and warning her children to don't hang out with that Jennifer girl. She's so, promiscuous or whatever. and then when she comes back, she's genuinely a happy person. When you get back to what the current present is, she's a happy person. She's got a happy marriage. She's got a happy life. She's loving and accepting and understanding of everybody instead of being bitter and hypocritical, I think is basically what the direction was. You're a bitter, hypocritical drunk. Go.
Yeah.
There was definitely some growth for her.
Well, the last thing I want to mention with Mulaney, and then Johnny, we can move on. But the other part of his sketch is the pitch meeting, is how he talks about like trying to pitch it to the studio heads about how the movie is about a guy that wants to sleep with his mother. And they make a big deal out of that. And again, I've known people that haven't seen Back to the Future that they say, oh, isn't that the movie when you tell them the title? They go, isn't that the movie where the main character wants to sleep with his mom? And I automatically think, well, obviously you've never seen the movie, but you are a John Mulaney fan. Again, It's funny, but to me, it's so dumb because if you watch the movie, at no point is Marty ever interested in that. He is disgusted by that idea and against that idea from the very start. Sure, Luke, like you said, it's creepy that she kind of wants to go after him, but she doesn't know. Like, she doesn't know what's if she did, I'm sure. And again, when she kisses him and she goes, it's like I'm kissing my brother, she's turned off. Mm-hmm. Like all of a sudden that's the change. But to me, again, it's the Mulaney thing. It's a funny sketch, but it's like, don't make that your gospel, because that is not what the movie is about. If you watch the movie even once, you'll be, oh yeah, what was I even thinking? That's not what the point was. And it's another thing that really bugs me about people trying to find flaws in this movie that aren't even there.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking about flaws, good segue, Darin. There are a lot of continuity errors in this movie, and this is my chance to kind of bring some of those to light because I've always noticed them. I've always wanted to talk about them. And the first being is the very first scene when Marty hooks up to the amplifier for the first time. Now, being a musician, you're supposed to plug in the guitar first before you turn the amp on.
Here we go.
Like this, metallic feedback sound, and it's kind of a ear-piercing sound to hear. But anyway, when he cranks all those overdrive nozzles up to the 100, and then plugs his guitar in, there's no feedback at all. Like nothing happens. So it's kind of like, okay, that's a mistake right there. And then when he strums the chord, you actually see Marty start flying backwards before the amp blows up. So it's like, okay, well, if the amp blew up and that's what propelled him backwards, why did he start flying backwards first? So that's always bugged me. And then this incident is never brought up ever again. Like, it's never talked about ever again. Like, he never Doc never says, hey, by the way, you owe me for that amp that you blew up. That never happens. So those things are always bugged me about the whole amplifier part of the movie. That's a little thing. But anyway, then during the car skateboard chase in the 50s, when Biff and the cronies are chasing him, and he steals that skateboard from the kid, when you first see him go around the corner on the sidewalk, you see several like skid marks, like several like almost like they'd attempted this, take or shot over and over again. And you see it before the skateboard goes over the sidewalk. So I've always noticed that, but I didn't really know why until recently. I was like, oh yeah, this probably is just different takes. But then when he's on the back of the truck, you see him like holding with two hands, and then he's on the side of the truck with just one hand, and then he's back to the middle of the truck with both hands again. And it's those little things like that keep happening during this chase scene that not takes me out, but I can forgive it because I love this movie. But it's kind of like, okay, there's another mistake right there. And then the very end of the chase, when they roll into that manure truck, all the actors in the car lean into the manure. I don't know why they do that. It's like you think if you ran into a truck full of manure, you would lean away from the manure, but they all lean their heads into it. It's like, why do they do that?
Or maybe they just thought it was mud and like, oh, mud bath. And so they lean, I don't know. You can
Okay, another little mistake I noticed. When he first goes back in time and he's in the diner and he goes back to the phone booth to find where Doc lives, he scrolls down the phone book on the left side of the page and he finds Doc's name and it says scientist next to it and everything. But then when he rips the page out, he rips the right side of the page out. So he's looking over here, and then he pulls this page out. So he pulled the wrong page out. And then it's also bugged me that the owner of the diner doesn't get mad that he defaced his phone book. He's like, doesn't even bring it up. And he's walking out waving.
After he has the argument about the tab and the Pepsi free. Like, you would think that would put the owner on alert.
Yeah. So that's something that I noticed. And the biggest thing is the alarm clock in the car at the end. Like, Doc does these calculations. He figures out you've got to hit the gas when this alarm goes off. You go, and then the car won't start when the alarm goes off. So Marty can't hit the gas right away, but things still work out. So if Marty had hit the gas when he was supposed to, he would have hit the wire too soon, and it wouldn't have worked. But because of the mistake of the car not starting, it all worked out. Maybe it's fate or whatever. But also, the 10:04 time that the lightning strike is supposed to happen, there's no seconds involved here. So we don't know exactly when it's going to hit during that 1 minute from 10:04 to 10:05. You have no idea. So maybe the fact that he was 7 seconds late hitting the gas pedal, maybe it was 10:04:07.
Yeah.
I don't know. But those kind of things.
That's all they needed, that little wiggle room of 1 minute.
Right. Yeah, those kind of things that I would notice while watching this movie over the years. And I would always kind of just laugh it off and just kind of like, not think much of it. But like I said, because I can forgive it because I love this movie. But would you guys have any other continuity errors that you would notice throughout the years that you want to bring up?
I've got one, but Luke, did you notice any?
Well, it's just the one that always bugged me because, we go from watching the end of Back to the Future 1 that transitions into Back to the Future 2. And then we end up having the recasting. That one, for me as a child, that always bugged me when actors were no longer playing the character that I identified them with. So to them to have,
You're talking about Jennifer?
Shue. Yeah, Elizabeth Shue come in
In place of Claudia Wells, yeah.
Right. I'm just like, what the heck? No, I couldn't even watch that movie and accept her as that character. And those kind of things that always just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Why did Hollywood do those things? But most of the time I'll just watch a movie and enjoy it for what the story they're trying to tell. When you're doing a movie about time travel, though, you would think that your editors would be paying attention to continuity. But yeah, like you said about the tire tracks and the skid marks, back in that day, as they were beginning the precipice of special effects, of modern special effects and blue screen and editing and such, literally being able to animate stuff out. Is it really something that people were going to pay money for or think that anyone was going to pay attention to skid marks? You'll see that all the time in movies and TV all the time. Like, well, they're out in the desert and nobody was ever here before, but here's all these tire marks and footprints everywhere. Why did we shoot that angle? But, I try not to let some of those things bug me and just enjoy it for just the entertainment value of the story and everything. But that was the only thing that really ever bugged me, was watching number 2 and then redoing that whole intro, and it's like, wait a second, it's not even the same person.
All right.
They had to redo all that.
Yeah.
They had to refilm all that.
And that's more a flaw with the second one and the third one, I guess, as opposed to this one.
Yeah, mistakes happen.
Right.
But yes, definitely a movie about time travel and continuity, those type of details. I mean, and it's not like it's Chris Nolan and Memento or something, and he has a whiteboard where he's explaining the whole plot line.
Yeah.
but maybe they did.
Maybe
What
they
was
did.
the mistake you noticed, Darren?
Well, first of all, obviously movies are going to have continuity errors. I know that if we comb through every single movie, you're going to find a bunch of flaws and things like that. And so unless they're like really glaring, Jurassic Park has a lot. There are doors. Somebody tries to open a door and they open it one side, and then the next cut, it opens from the other side. There's the part of the end when the velociraptors are stalking the two kids. Timmy's hair is up because he's been, electrified, right? And when they go into the kitchen, his hair is like that. But then it cuts to the Sam Neill and Laura Dern characters. When it cuts back, Timmy's hair is all of a sudden slicked down and it's combed. It's not fuzzy anymore. And I think, number one, they do that because you're not going to be able to pay attention to the tension of the scene if you're laughing at the kid's hair. And so, but when the movie's going, you don't notice stuff like that. Mm-hmm. With Jurassic Park, my favorite flaw of that one is that when you see the T-Rex come through the gate, he's on solid ground, right? He only destroys one part of the gate. And then when the T-Rex pushes the Jeep off, and there's that scene where all of a sudden it's the Grant and the girl character who are hanging off the side. Where did the 60-foot drop come from all of a sudden? Like, why wasn't the Tyrannosaurus just walking on solid ground? Yeah. But when you're caught up in the moment, and that's a huge flub, but when you're caught up in the moment, you don't notice that. Again, going back with Spielberg some more, with Jaws, the tank, it would not explode like that. Peter Benchley told Steven Spielberg, you can't, it's not how it works. But Spielberg actually said, it doesn't matter, because at that point, I will have the audience eating out of the palm of my hand and they'll buy it. So the flaw that I have in this one, that's a very Spielberg-ian type of flub like that. How did Doc get into the DeLorean, drive it in to the truck trailer, and then close the door? I assume that if he put it in there, he could go in there later, but the doors open from the top. How did he get in once the DeLorean was in the trailer? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's impossible. Yeah. But as a moment, as a mythical moment, when the car pulls out and it has the Alan Silvestri score for the first time popping in after like 18 minutes, and it pulls out and the car like reveals itself, and it's this space age type thing, and there's smoke coming off it, and Doc comes out and kind of has the bug eyes, and it deflates the moment. It works in the moment because you don't notice those flaws. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's a thing where you're like, well, let's kick logic out the door because I really want to have this moment of mythic like impact on the audience, and that's why it works. So again, Johnny, just like you're saying, there are continuity errors you're going to notice, but as long as it's not pervasive and you don't notice one every scene, it's not going to be a problem, I don't think.
I think there's a quick fix for how Doc was able to, be in the DeLorean and operate the truck. He showed that he had the DeLorean hooked up to a remote control. Why wouldn't, I think Doc would have been inside. He backed up the DeLorean into the truck, sat there and said, "Oh, crap. Well, it's a good thing I had the truck programmed on remote control too." And just drove it that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Luke, you mentioned that you're a big fan of time travel movies, and that's why you picked this one. But are there anything in this movie as far as the time travel, like paradoxes go, that you want to bring up?
It's not so much in this one, and it's what a lot of fans have a problem with, or critics will have a problem with the whole franchise in general. It's in number 2. But, I think as far as Back to the Future, number 1, they did a good job setting up all the issues that needed to be fixed in his parents' life that he didn't know he was back in time to fix, but that it came up that, oh no, your sister and your brother are starting to disappear on this Polaroid. This is how you gotta. They came up with they recognized the problems and they were able to find the solutions. I liked how Doc was very animate about, we don't mess with these things. No, don't tell me about my future. Don't tell me any of that. And I think they respected it a lot more in the first one. And then, as you saw later on in the franchise, Doc was getting a little bit more liberal with it. The future's not written. It can be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. Well, does the paradox have anything to do with, because this is something, and again, this has nothing really to do with Back to the Future 1, but in Back to the Future 2, if Marty is in the present and he jumps into the future, my problem is always like, he doesn't exist from when he leaves until he pops up again in 2015. You know what I mean? It's like, how does he get married and have kids if he's jumped into the future?
Yeah, and that was, I think, one of the factors, because he wakes up in his house, and it's not his house. You know, he stumbled in there and he's in somebody else's bed, and it's just this chaotic other future. And basically, it all depends on, now you get into astrophysics and actual time travel, and there's different concepts of, you know, if you are a being that has somehow been able to remove yourself from a timeline and can go and experience alternate timelines, then you're either thinking of alternate string theories, or you're thinking of you are removing yourself from the existence of, and that timeline stops with you leaving it. And you're the only person that remembered that timeline, and you're carrying it with you. So it wouldn't exist for anyone else. Basically, that universe ends when you leave it.
Yeah. So how is he in boarding school when that's going
right? You know,
that's kind of what I was. That's kind of what I was telling Darin about. When Marty leaves and goes back to the past, and then he comes back and sees himself get in the DeLorean and leave again. Like, that new Marty now has to make the exact same choices that old Marty made in order to get back to where he is now. If he makes a different choice, a whole new timeline is created, and then, you know, it could go on forever. New timelines just keep getting created for every time Marty goes back in time. And so that's why there's this whole time travel paradox thing going on.
And that's what Bill and Ted was always like making fun of or poking fun of, is like, dude, Bill, we gotta remember to go get that, go do that. We gotta do, you know, after this, we're gonna go do that, you know. And they don't really address that. It's like, no, don't worry about it. We'll get you back. You know, we got to go fix this here.
Well, we've only got 7 more years until time travel becomes a thing. So
yeah, that's true.
2028.
Well, don't you think it's funny with these time travel movies that you have a lot of these, you just have to take them at face value. Otherwise, you kind of go crazy. Like, there's a lot of things you just have to accept. The Terminator movies, for one thing, if you're going to send one Terminator back, and then at the moment where Sarah Connor is at her most vulnerable, why not send another Terminator back right then to kill her off? Why do you wait 10 years? To try and kill her son? You know, there's always these, and, you know, Frequency is another one that I always bring up. I liked how that one, like, if you change the past, like his dad changes what goes on, the present tense son, he's still able to retain those memories, and so it's confusing for him to try to kind of simplify them and stick them together. So there's always the time travel stuff that's always confusing. It's just, I think if we get too caught up on it, then it kind of loses the fun of what we're supposed to be watching.
I prescribe to the concept of you're in a loop and you'll finish the loop. And that loop always was going to happen, and there's nothing you could do to stop it from happening. The mere fact that you were going to do it, you made the loop, and you already altered time. You just may not see how you did it.
Yeah, no, good point. So is there any other things you want to bring up before we go to Worth Remembering or Worth Remake?
Well, the only other thing that I wanted to talk about the screenplay. I know that we've talked about a lot of the themes and everything. Let's see here. I just want to make sure I'm getting my notes up here. So again, this screenplay is studied, and there's a reason for that. Like, if you were to look at the notes that I have here, that opening shot of when they're doing the credits and you see Doc's house, it's full of foreshadowing. Like, you see the clocks, obviously, which is going to be a theme. You see a man, like, I think it's a Harold Lloyd reference, but you see a man hanging from a clock arm, which is what happens later to Doc Brown. On the TV screen, you hear like the Libyan terrorist group claiming responsibility for the plutonium disappearing. So that's kind of fun details. But what I love about this screenplay is that it sets up plot points like they're dominoes. And then once they're all set up, it starts knocking them down, like, just masterfully. Like, if we're to talk about those, the notes I have here, it talks about Marty being late, which, you know, he goes back to the past to try to fix everything. In the beginning, you see flyers for Mayor Goldie Wilson and then you meet him later. When he confronts Strickland in the school, Strickland says, no Mcfly has ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley. And then they do. when he's playing, I like the joke that it's Huey Lewis telling Marty that it's a Huey Lewis song is too loud. Yeah, that's funny. But that gives Marty the chance when he's talking with Jennifer later. He says, I'm never going to get a chance to stand in front of everybody and play for everyone. And that's what he gets to do, right? You talk about the Save the Clock Tower. That's set up when they're during that conversation. They say the clock tower, and it's weird exposition, but it kind of passes it off as this weird lady that's just trying to do her job. And Marty kind of shuts her up and puts the quarter in and kind of shoos her off. You talk about Lorraine's lectures. You talk about Lorraine never saying she sits in a car with a boy when she in fact has before. Strickland when he shows up, there's no reason. Obviously it's James Tolkien, it's fun having him in there, but there's no real foreshadowing other than a funny joke later when Marty sees him and goes, didn't that guy ever have hair? I thought that was funny. But it's also the jailbird Joey joke I love. It doesn't have to be in there, but when Marty says, better get used to these bars, kid, what a giant laugh. So fun having that in there. Or the joke that I didn't notice, and this is when we talk about with great movies actually having meaning for you later. I didn't notice the Twin Pines Mall sign turning into the Lone Pines Mall sign until maybe a decade later. And one day I just saw it because you're in that part, you're just paying attention to Marty trying to get to Doc, right? That's what the whole scene is about. He's trying to save him. You don't notice that sign until you've seen this movie a dozen times and you're able to look at the details. And I remember seeing that for the first time and just laughing my ass off. I just thought it was so funny. But then you also have, they set up George getting hit by the car. You have the enchantment under the sea dance. Even the DeLorean dying is set up at the beginning when Marty gets back and it doesn't work and he has to kind of push the car behind the sign. Doc's explanation of the flux capacitor. But once all those things are set up and then it starts knocking them down, I'm just so impressed by that because either number one, Zemeckis and Gale are such geniuses that they knew they had to do that, or when you're writing a screenplay, and I think this is why the movie's studied and this is why it's important. When you're writing a screenplay and you think, the car dies, we don't just want that to happen. How do we do this? And they would maybe go back and they would write it into the script somewhere. When you talk about the enchantment under the sea dance, like they talk about that, how do we fix that? Well, let's go back and have Lorraine mention it. They have these things where they have to go back and rewrite parts of the script so that they're able to pay off later. And a lot of times movies don't, I would say 90% of the time movies don't do that. I just think that the screenplay is so masterful for the way that it sets up all these plot points and then it's able to resolve them. And I don't know if you guys have seen Used Cars or seen I Want to Hold Your Hand, or to a lesser extent, Romancing the Stone, but Zemeckis and Gale, when their first few movies, it starts off calm and good story, and then it just picks up speed and energy. And so it's like a non-stop, kind of a breathless exhilaration of instances and narrative, conflicts being resolved. And it's just this manic kind of madcap thing. And it's breathless and it's great. And I just don't know if a lot of filmmakers like Zemeckis have that in him. And then obviously Zemeckis, I love him more when he concentrates on story as opposed to when he gets too caught up in his special effects stuff, because I think he tends to lose the heart, which is kind of what happens later with the sequels. But again, this screenplay, a lot of people, when they watch movies today, they just want to be placated. They want to have the superheroes say funny things and that's it. But this screenplay works just from ground level, and I don't know. It's just masterful, and it should be studied. That's the main thing.
No, I agree with you. I think that's what makes it so endurable to go back and revisit over and over again, because you do catch those things. You notice those things that you didn't catch the last time you watched it. So that's why it's always fresh whenever you sit down and watch it again. And that's why it has stand the test of time.
Yeah.
But anyway, Luke, is there anything else that you want to bring up before we talk about what we think about it?
And I agree with Darin. Just they gave you the idea of what was going to happen. They set up the scenarios and they set up the dominoes, and they just started knocking them into place. There was one main thing about Biff. You knew his grandma was yelling at him, and he had his own world of keeping his car, and he lived in his garage and he took care of his car. But his grandma was always yelling at him. I always imagined his grandma was the mom from Throw Mama from the Train. That's why he was so upset and just had such a crappy life. He was picked on.
Well, did you guys, the only other thing that maybe talking about that is with flaws in the movie story-wise, I think what did you guys think of George punching out Biff? Marty sees it, he proves himself. why does there need to be another scene immediately following that where George has to prove himself again? You know, and with the scene where the guy comes up and do you guys have an explanation for that, or why that works or doesn't work? I don't know. For me, no movie is perfect, but I think that's the one flaw.
It's just there to build the tension before Marty can be made whole again. You know what I mean? Like it's just building tension. That's all it is. Yeah,
it's repetitive, but I like it. I'm not saying I don't like it. It's just I just always think it's weird that why does he have to prove himself 2 times in a row when he's already done that? But that's basically.
And then it reemphasizes the delicacy of choices and how it affects who we become. And so, like, that was one of those dominoes. Then the song plays. And that was one of the things that they were trying to push. No, you got to get out there and play that song. If they don't hear that song, then they don't kiss and they don't fall in love. You know.
Yeah.
You thought it was save her from getting raped in the car or whatever from this douchebag, but it was continuing to be her protector and her champion, and sweep her off her feet continuously doing that. That's what he needed to do, this little extra bit. Not to just restore the timeline, but that was to improve the timeline.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that. The only thing I have is real quick the bulletproof vest that Doc wears when he retapes the letter back together. Those Libyans shot like 20 rounds into him when he first gets shot, and then when you see him pull open the suit and show the vest, there's like maybe 6 bullets in the vest, and that's always bothered me too. But again, I can forgive it. So. Okay, so Luke, we're there. So what do you think? Is this movie worth remembering, or is it worth a remake?
I do not think that we should touch anything from the 80s and remake anything from the 80s. The 90s, definitely, but not the 80s. Let's just leave the 80s alone.
Well, why do you think that? I mean, what message like does Back to the Future like have for you?
Well, like, okay, I mean, the special effects were exactly what they needed to be for that time, and they wowed us, and we were impressed, and everything was great. But what happens now is like your kids are more impressed with 4K Ultra and all these just amazing special effects that everybody can do, and you try to show them something like Dune and from the 80s and so that they get the whole story and not part of the story. And they're just cringing at the special effects. And you're like, no, I like some of these special effects over what they did currently in the new version. You know, they wasted a lot of their money on Jason Momoa and Zendaya when they could have, maybe done some better choices. But I really don't want to see that happen to Back to the Future. Because then you got to have actors try to, it just opens a can of worm of nightmares, and I don't want to see it happen. It's just something that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I know Zemeckis has it in, I don't know if it's true or not, but he has it in his like contract that as long as he's alive, they're not allowed to touch Back to the Future and remake it. So he's like, over my dead body.
Because I have heard that there is talks about remaking it. So I don't know where they're at with that. But as long as, I guess, if he's still alive, that's good. That's a good thing. Because I think for sure it should be not touched, left alone. It is, what it is. It's a great movie. But anyway, Luke, where can our listeners find you? I know you said you host the podcast Q for You. Let them know where they can find you, where they can subscribe and all that good stuff.
So we've been bounced around all kinds of places because of all getting involved politically. We'll do a little bit of a sample on YouTube. Q4UPodcast.com is where we host our full show. We've got to the point where we have to have paid subscriptions to be able to see the whole episodes, but we do 5 nights a week, basically. Each night's a different topic, different subject, and it's just been a blast. We've been doing this for over a year now. We just celebrated our birthday in November, but for a brief time, we had to go on to OnlyFans because it was like a Patreon paid account thing, but then we had too many people going, wait, isn't that a porn site? And so that's why this looks like Pornhub, but it's a jab at that. But we finally got to where we were hosting it on our own website, Q4UPodcast.com, and We're gearing up to be Q4U Plus, where we want to eventually get to comedy sketches and fleshing out some of these stories and jokes that we tell, and be able to create a lot of that. We're plugging and promoting my books. So I've got my first book. My second book is coming out in January. And, believe it or not, even though this is a book that has a self-taught witch, it is a time travel book. So that's what, I was able to get time traveling in there.
Of course. What's the name of the book?
The book is called Nightmares. The series is called The Dream Diaries. And that's why, George Mcfly appeals to me, because it was very much something that happened to me where I had to set my dreams aside to raise a family and provide and everything. And the opportunity came, it was back in 2019. Someone approached me who was going to publish in their retirement years. I thought that was an odd hobby to publish books or whatever. And like, okay, I've got the story. And he's like, well, can you finish it by this time? And we worked together, and he was new and I was new, and we eventually had to part ways because he was making it too complicated, and I learned what I needed to do. But, now I'm my own boss when it comes with the book. I've set a schedule to publish a book every year. So the first of the year, day one, New Year's Day, it'll be available on QFUpodcast.com exclusively. You can still get it through, I publish through Kindle and Amazon, so you'll be able to get the second book. There's actually a giant poster in my office here of the second book. I don't know if you can see that, the gun
Revolver
poster, but it's called Revolver. Yeah, so basically the idea in that one, what goes around comes around, heavily in the concept of karma. But I like the idea of getting people to a point where they can believe in something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
And the first book with the time travels, the book spans a period of 30 years because the character has to go back. Then they're stuck in the loop, and they have to live out the loop, but nothing happens to them. They don't age. So they're stuck behind the scenes watching themselves grow up, kind of thing. But it gives them the opportunity to be with their mentor and learn more behind the scenes. So there was a kind of a double life happening. In the second book, it's a new narrator. And I had to explain this to my editor before. It's going to be told from this person's vocabulary and their point of view.
So it changes perspective.
Right. It's not going to be told by an English major who's doing an omnipresent narrator that knows everyone's thoughts and everything. So if you want to share someone else's thoughts, that's where the magic comes in, being able to read minds, share other people's feelings, and understand what they're thinking, and communicate with each other through thoughts. That's what I get to explore with it. Yeah, the witch helps out the new character understand what they're going through, because our narrator's now experiencing all this and freaking out. So this story takes place in the span of a day. So the difference of being able to have 40 years to play with and one day was just, I shot myself in the foot 2 different times. Oh, now I got to be this character, boom, shoot myself in the foot. And now I got to do this in one day. Shoot, it was... Next book sounds 10 years from now.
All right. Well, so Nightmares and Revolver comes out in January, right? Luke R. Harris.
Yeah. So Nightmares is already out on the website and on Kindle, and then the second one will be out day 1, January, and then I'll start working on the third book.
All right. Well, Luke, thanks for joining us, man. Thanks for bringing Back to the Future to us, because, like I said, we're going to do it, but we're glad that we did. So.
Thanks for bringing some, again, we were worried that we wouldn't be able to bring new stuff to it. And you did that a few times. I hope that people listening are able to, process new lessons from the movie as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Any movie you guys are too worried to touch, let me know. I'll tear it apart.
All right. We'll definitely bring you back on. All right, Luke, thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.
And then Darin and I will probably come back after this, and we'll talk about like the second and third Back to the Future.
Yeah, maybe touch on those a little bit more. Sounds good.
All right, we'll be back in a few seconds.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Luke.
What's this? What's this?
Okay, welcome back. I want to thank Luke for joining us and bringing Back to the Future to us. That was a lot of fun to talk about with him.
Yeah.
And be sure to check out his podcast, Q for You, as well as his books, Nightmares and Revolver, which you can find online and on his website. So anyway, thanks, Luke. Darin, we talked about Back to the Future and we talked about for our outro just to kind of talk about the second and third. But was there anything else that we missed in the meat of our conversation that we didn't talk about you want to talk about now?
Well, I don't know if necessarily, there is one thing that I want to talk about, but I did put out some Twitter feelers about the paradoxes like we talked about, because I know you mentioned, like, we were texting back and forth before we recorded, and you talked about what we want to do, like, paradoxes, and you want to talk about the time stuff. And so I thought, well, it'd be fun to kind of put some feelers out and see if anybody else had issue with any time paradoxes. I've got 3 from people that are friends on Twitter, and we can maybe chat about those. But at Thief CGT, who's a good friend, he says, if Marty's interference in the past changed George and Lorraine so much that their children's whole personas changed, why is Marty still Marty?
Well, he wouldn't be. That's the whole thing. Because the new parents would have raised a different Marty.
Yeah.
That was my point.
Yeah. It's interesting because, and it's one of those things where Marty doesn't really change throughout the course of it. He's the same at the beginning that he is in the end, except he gets to play in front of people so that he accomplishes a goal. But I think his whole journey is to change the people around him, which he does, which again is a good narrative kind of ploy.
Yeah. I mean, the new Marty is now back in the 50s, and the original Marty is now taking his place. And so that's what's going on.
Right. So that's nuts. Again, time paradox.
You would notice that Marty's different. Like, you know what I mean? But they don't.
Right. Well, you could also say that Marty has a good level head about him. You know what I mean? It's like he's not that, he's the most centered probably out of all the kids. And so maybe there aren't drastic changes. He's going to more or less be the same.
I can buy that.
We got at Braxter81 who says, and we talked about this, he says the part where Marty is disappearing on stage really made no sense that it was happening, since George is going to shove that red-haired guy to the ground and kiss Lorraine after punching Biff. But the scene is still fun and effective if you aren't thinking about it too much. And that's what we chatted about. I know I kind of had an issue with, why is he having to prove himself twice? But it's also funny that, like, why would it, if he was going to push him down to the ground anyway, why would he be disappearing and have that? It's just a nice dramatic thing to kind of pull.
Yeah, like I say, it builds the tension for the scene.
Yeah, and that's fine. I get that. And then lastly, we've got at AJC Abroad, who's also Dallin Curtis. We had him on to chat about Secondhand Lions. That's his dad. He he says, if you're George and Lorraine, would you really hire Biff to clean your cars and yuck it up with him? The guy who was mid-sexual assault with Lorraine before George showed up and nearly broke his arm. What timeline does this make sense in? And I know I had my one flaw was the thing with George, but that's, if you were to talk to John Mulaney of it all, about how, it's about the kid, Marty wanted to sleep with his mom, which is not true. It's, talking about how did Marty meet Doc, and that's a whole problem, and it keeps me from watching the movie, which that's not a big deal. So the one thing that I would really push back against is, why would they invite a rapist into their house and chumming up with them? You know what I mean?
It is weird.
But anyway, and then the only other thing I wanted to mention, just kind of to segue into talking about the sequels, is it's always been funny to me because from the video release of Back to the Future, when Doc comes back and he says, roads, where we're going, we don't need roads, and the DeLorean launches into the air and flies into the camera, it says to be continued, right? But they added that for video once they started planning to do the sequels. They never planned, Zemeckis and Gale never planned on making a sequel to this movie. That thing with Doc coming back and we got to do something about your kids was a gag. It's just one final joke to get to send the audience out on. And so when they decided to do sequels, they ran into some problems because I think Gail says that if we really planned on making sequels, we would not have had Jennifer climb into the car with them, which is why she's automatically taken out of the picture where Doc has that little machine that he kind of fries her brain with and knocks her out. But if we were to talk about the rest of the trilogy, what are your feelings on Back to the Future Part 2? We'll talk about that, and then let's talk about 3. But what are your feelings on 2?
Well, first, let's mention 2 that they filmed both 2 and 3 at the same time. They did movies together. Like they would film 1. I think they filmed 2, and then he would, when they were filming 3, he'd go back and edit the second one at night, and then film the third one during the day. Right. But anyway, as far as the second one goes, I know there's some misgivings out there about this movie, but I tend to enjoy it. I don't think I liked it when it first came out, but I tend to enjoy it now. I like watching some of the film tricks that they use, as far as split screens, having old Biff talk to young Biff and vice versa, and having Marty see himself on stage and all that kind of stuff. That's fun. It's fun for me. I know some of the storyline's weird, but I kind of think of this movie as a transitory movie. Like it's just there to get us to the third one, which I think is a lot better than the second one.
Right. That's one of there's 2 main things that really bother me about, actually maybe 3. We mentioned it briefly, I think, in a previous episode when I talked about there's no heart to the movie. When they were planning and Bob Gale was writing the script for Part 2, Zemeckis was off making Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which, if you were to push me, I think Roger Rabbit is Zemeckis' masterpiece. I know Back to the Future is seminal. Back to the Future is probably my favorite Robert Zemeckis movie. But Zemeckis, he was really good on story, like we talked about. Like his movies, I mentioned I Want to Hold Your Hand, Used Cars, Romance in the Stone. They're breathless and they're exhilarating. There's a real imagination, creativity to them. And that's the story. Back to the Future, what gets me is the story. So if the special effects are a little wonky, that's okay, because the story gets me, right? But he started getting addicted to the technical side of it. So when he's doing Roger Rabbit and they're learning all the different tricks to interact with the humans in the cartoons, I think Roger Rabbit works because it's the technical marvel, but it's also like kind of a film noir, Raymond Chandler, kind of Chinatown with cartoons as some of the characters. Yeah. And so that plot, if you took the cartoons out, it still works. And the cartoons just add an extra layer of fun. So that's like Zemeckis' story side and his technical side just working perfectly in tandem. Now, when they do Back to the Future 2, it is fun. They have like the VistaGlide camera system and the digital compositing, which before you'd have to lock a camera down. If you want to have an actor act with himself, you have to lock it down and then they'd interact that way. But the VistaGlide is able to move and it's able to make dynamic camera moves. So you can move the frame and reveal like young Biff walking and show old Biff like in his car. You could do that without having to just cut from a shot. So a lot of that, and then you have Marty too, Marty Senior, Marty Junior, and Marlene, all played by Michael J. Fox, interacting together at the table, and it's fun to watch. Like I get that, but I think that to me it seems like he was addicted to that technology, and he didn't really have a story in mind. Because if we're waiting 4 years, the whole thing of waiting 4 years just to keep Marty Jr. out of jail for like a week, you know what I mean? It seems a little weak to me as far as a connective tissue.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is, the main thing that bothers me is these characters who are realistic. We talked about Biff being a kind of a cartoon, and I mentioned it briefly, but in this movie, all the characters become full-on cartoons. Like Michael J. Fox's exaggerated movements are just there because they're there. They're more exaggerated this time. Doc Brown's movements are more exaggerated this time. Thomas F. Wilson is more of a cartoon. And I know Crispin Glover wasn't there to do this one, so they had to replace him with a different actor. What was his name? They had Jeffrey Wiseman, I think, and so he's even more of a cartoon. It's weird watching the George at the end of Part 1, the Studley 6 foot, 7 foot tall George, all of a sudden revert and become the same cartoonish 80s George McFly, the way Wiseman plays him. So everybody's a cartoon, and it doesn't really jive with me. And then too, what do you think of the makeup in the first Back to the Future? I know that they aged up Wilson and Thompson and Glover.
Yeah, I thought it was decent. I think watching it again just a couple nights ago, it was like I was obvious that it was makeup, but I think when I was younger, it didn't bother me. Like I bought it.
Yeah, because we don't know that they're supposed to be younger. Like I wasn't familiar with Glover or Thompson or Thomas F. Wilson when I first saw it. So I assumed that they were old and then they maybe de-aged them or something. So the makeup was never an issue for me. But looking at it now, it's relatively believable as makeup. They've got liver spots, they've got wrinkles on their neck. Christopher Lloyd has that too. But in this movie, in this one, I'm not sure what the problem is, but the makeup on everybody looks like they're molded in plastic. Like it's really obvious that it's makeup, and it's the way that it's maybe lit, the way that it's shot. I just don't buy the makeup in this one. Everybody looks again like they're made in plastic. And there's the part where because they don't want to have Christopher Lloyd wear makeup the whole time, he tells Marty that has nothing to do with anything. He just starts taking off his prosthetic face that how they had, and he's like, oh, and I had some like slip done, and I changed all this, and just so he can look like young present day Christopher Lloyd.
That was a funny moment. I like that moment.
Yeah, and to me, it's the equivalent. Whenever you watch a movie when people are talking in another language and it's subtitled, and then for some reason you have somebody go, your English is awful, your Russian is awful, speak English. Just for no reason, just so they don't have to have the subtitles anymore. I just thought that was funny. But so there's that, and then I don't know. It was just missing the heart. It seemed all of a technical exercise, which is fun. And the other thing too, if you were to think about shooting back to back, the thing that really just cracks me up is Marty's whole thing with being a chicken. Where did that come from?
Yeah, they added that just because they wanted to give him some motivation for, his character, which wasn't in the first one. So it made no sense why all of a sudden it shows up in the second and third one.
As a through line for the third one, man. And it's like, it's such a big deal. And I'm not even exaggerating. When somebody goes, what are you, chicken? And on the soundtrack goes, dun, dun! Like it's huge. Like it's like a disease with a mental block. Mm-hmm. So why would that not, if it's so huge, why would it not be a part? I don't know. I just thought it was funny. And it reminds me of movies that are shot back to back, like Pirates of the Caribbean, where all of a sudden Captain Jack's compass has to have, it's able to point him places now where it didn't really do that. You have the Matrix movies that were shot back to back, the sequels, where all of a sudden Neo's having dreams. So I don't know. It's just a weird kind of thing that they do when they shoot these things back to back. Yeah. And then, like you mentioned, I like when they go back to 1950. I like that there's that whole, you see it from a different angle. That's clever. I like that. Even though you notice that when you do footage of the old Back to the Future with part 2, Michael J. Fox's voice is different. I don't know if you've noticed. It's a little deeper in part 2 than it is in the footage, since maybe he went through more puberty. I don't know what happened, but so I like all of that, and it's fun, and I like how it builds to like the cliffhanger that you don't really see. But if you were to talk, you mentioned that part 2 is basically a build up to part 3, which that's weird. That's so weird to sit, because they keep doing that. Like when Marty goes to the alternate 85 and he's at the Biff Museum or whatever, and they talk about Buford Tannen, or later when Biff, Donald Trump Biff is watching A Fistful of Dollars and he sees Clint Eastwood with the metal, the oven, as the bulletproof vest that's used later. It keeps doing those things where it's like, oh, that's part 3 that's coming up, which if it's me, I'm watching it going, then just show me part 3. If you're not interested in what you're doing here, let's get to part 3 already, and let's do what you really want to do. I don't know. Yeah. So those are my main problems with it. Everybody's just a full-on cartoon. I don't buy them as the same people from the first movie. It doesn't have heart. It's more of a technical exercise, which is fun. And then the other thing is it just plays like a 2-hour trailer, which is funny because, again, it even ends in a trailer for part 3. I don't know. It just seems like a cheat.
I know. It is pretty obvious they really wanted to do part 3 more. Like that was more important to them, which is why I think part 3 works. I think it shows that was where their heart lied, So it's a better movie all around.
Yeah, everybody's still, when they go to the future in the end, and George is still acted like a cartoon, and Thomas at Biff is still a cartoon. So that stuff kind of ports over, but it's such a little part of part 3 that it doesn't really bother me as much. But what I do love about part 3, and I know that there's, I think more people, if you were to do a poll, maybe a lot more people would like part 2 just because of how inventive and how fast it moves all the time. But for me, I love, it shows Marty come back and Doc faints, and then it cuts and it does the credits, and it's just a calm, it has kind of like an echo of part 1, where it shows Doc's office or whatever, his house, where it's just the camera's gliding over everything in the room. And it kind of does the same thing where you see like the hoverboard and it's nice and calm. And Alan Silvestri's music has like a calm kind of fluty kind of sound to it. So I love that it kind of dials down the tone. It goes from an 11 down to maybe a 7 again, because the Christopher Lloyd, Mary Steenburgen stuff is very sweet. And like it's very sincere. And I know that they've done interviews where they were attracted to each other because they were just they had good chemistry together. But
yeah,
what is it about part 3 that you like? Because I just told you that I like that it settles down and it's more of a calm version. But what is it, and where would you rank it as far as the trilogy goes?
Yeah, I would probably rank it second. But I think the overall story is better. I think they tell a better story in the third movie. That could be a standalone movie if you did nothing to do with the first two and you just had told the story of time travel. That could be its own movie. I'm not a huge Western fan, but I like that it's set in the Old West. That's fun. And we talked about Thomas F. Wilson being like just at his best playing Griff. And I think he actually kind of makes the movie for me watching him play Griff.
Right. You talking about Westerns too. Another kind of, they talk about in part 2 how Doc always wanted to go and visit the Old West. Again, it's like, oh, come on, just get there already if that's what you want to do. But it's just because the comedy is so broad in part 2, and then it's really disarming to me, the stuff with Buford. They're at the dance or whatever, the festival, and Marty yells at him, "Lighten up, jerk," and he doesn't know what that means. So again, he looks at his cronies, and his cronies are like, they kind of shrug it off. It's so funny, and it's like kind of witty in a way, where part 2 wasn't like that at all. I get such a huge kick out of the Buford stuff, and like I said, it's like Wilson kind of saves his performance.
Wait, it's not Griff, it's Buford, sir.
Yeah, Buford. Did I say Griff?
Which one's Griff? Griff is the second one.
Griff is like the nephew. In
okay,
part
that's
2.
right. I had it wrong. Okay,
right. And it's never obvious. Again, with part 2, you know how it does it. It goes back and revisits stuff. It's practically a remake of the first one. You have the scene where Marty's on the hoverboard, right, and Griff's guys are chasing him, which is fine. But I don't need old Biff to sit there and go, "There's something very familiar about all this." It's like, yeah, I get it. You know what I mean? You don't have to punch me in the face by telling me that it's. And so part 3 has none of that. It focuses on story. It focuses on their goals. Clara comes in and kind of throws them for a loop. And it just adds this extra layer that wasn't there in the second one, because again, I think they were just waiting for it. And I like, again, that it echoes part 1, how it builds and they're on the train trying to get back. It has the scene at the end where Doc comes back or whatever. So I don't know. There's not really a lot to say about the third one other than I just like it. I mean, it settles down and it's sweet, and it ends the trilogy on a good note. The chicken thing is resolved, I guess, just because Marty decides, you know what I mean? I like and again, even though they said it in the second one, I like the reveal of Marty using the oven door as a bulletproof vest. I like all of that. So I don't really have any issues with part 3, other than it's maybe not as madcap inventive as the first one, because what else can you do? You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right, that sounds good. So since we had Luke on, I think it's my turn, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, because I have one, and I kind of excited for this one. This is a movie that I only saw maybe a few times when I was younger, and I haven't seen it since. So it's going to be really fun to go back and see it again. So it's called Cloak and Dagger.
Oh,
I don't know if you've heard of that or seen it.
Yes, Dabney Coleman and Henry Thomas, right?
Dabney Coleman, yeah.
That movie was actually on my list of ones that I wanted to do.
Okay.
Because I showed it to the kids maybe about 5-6 years back. We were able to get a copy of it or rent a copy. And so I was like, I need to talk about this movie. So, Cloak and Dagger. That's great.
Cloak and Dagger.
That's great. Let's talk about that.
Okay, let's do it. So we'll do that next time. But for NostalgiaCast, I am Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
And we'll see you next time.
See you guys.